because the charge was heresy, the arrested had no right to counsel. Normally torture would be allowed to the extent that it would accomplish its goal, but not cause mutilation or permanent injury. For the Templars, however, an exception was made. The torture was carried out with a barbarity which even medieval men found shocking. 13 confined to dungeons, sustained with bread and water, accused of the most heinous perversions, and tortured beyond endurance. Many knights lost their ability to reason, several committed suicide, and most confessed to anything. Those who survived the 2 years of imprisonment had little to look forward to other than their death. In May 1310 the soldiers of Philip bound 54 Knights Templar to carts, and brought them to fields near the convent of Saint Antoine outside Paris, where they were stripped, tied to stakes, and burned to death. The King of France broke the order, but failed to confiscate their treasure. He was further disappointed by the reaction of his fellow kings. Instead of the other nations suppressing the Templars within their New World Order 25 borders, they had to be goaded into taking any steps against the knights. In England, Edward II was very slow in reacting to the demands of the Roman Pope. The new king was simply uninterested, as his focus was on the continuing war with Scotland, and on his lover. After persistent pressure from the Pope, Edward made a handful of arrests, and later succumbed to the Church's demand for torture, which was forbidden by English law. Edward did not shield the Templar organization, and allowed its property to be seized. To the disappointment of the Church, however, the property seized did not revert to the Church, but instead was distributed by Edward in his own fashion, most likely to his creditors and allies. Scotland finally agreed in principle to an inquisition of the Templars. The country had continually fought the Pope, who would eventually excommunicate both the king and the nation. The degree of compliance in Scotland was minimal, with a total of 2 knights questioned. In Spain and Portugal the Templar fighting force was important to the kings. After a few arrests and seizures, the Portuguese quickly reincorporated the order into the Knights of Christ, which now reported only to the Portuguese king. In the parts of Spain controlled by the Inquisition there were arrests and torture, but the order and its men were soon incorporated into several other orders of the Spanish military. In Germany the Teutonic Knights, which had been formed separately, marched into the court at Metz armed to the teeth, and challenged the court to bring charges. They were not Templars, but presented their case to head of similar charges. The court assured the order its existence was not in danger. Although all this frustrated Philip, his greatest frustration was the disappearance of the treasure from the Paris Temple Bank. It had reportedly been loaded on a wagon train that raced for the port of La Rochelle. There the treasure was placed aboard the Templar fleet, again flying the Skull and Crossbones, from which it disappeared once more. While many of the French Templars who were captured suffered long imprisonments and gruesome tortures, many others, who were now regarded as outlaws, used the Templar fleet as their home base. It was difficult for a large, armed group of men to escape detection on land, but the ship's 26 piracy, a merry and a short life provided a mobile hideout as well as a place to live. With their immense treasure supplemented with piracy, the Templars who had escaped France survived. The final act against the order was committed on March 18, 1314. The 4 surviving officials of the order, the Grand Master, the Visitor, and the preceptors of Aquitaine and Normandy, were burned on an island in the Seine River in view of the royal gardens. The resurrection of the Templars, while the arrested French Templars suffered imprisonment, torture, and often execution, the remnant Templar organization became like the mythical Hydra. One head was cut off at the neck and others sprouted. The new organizations in Germany, Portugal, and Spain were all various Templary incarnations. In Germany the Teutonic Knights needed their own raison d'etre, and they quickly found one. They turned their attention from the armies of Islam, which were apparently too strong for Europe, to the more easily conquered pagan Lithuanians. A new northern crusade found the well-equipped Teutonic Knights doing battle with the Lithuanian peasant farmers and converting or killing them in short order. This new crusade was less an instrument of the Catholic Church for converting the world and a weapon in the German war of expansion. In the Iberian Peninsula the war against Islam was still an active conflict. The kings of Portugal and Spain needed all the help they could muster. Spain's most sacred pilgrimage spot was St. James of Compostela. The Order of the Knights of Santiago, whose name was derived from the Spanish Santo Iago, or St. James, performed activities that were similar to the original efforts of the Templars. It protected pilgrims along the world's second most important route. In neighbouring Portugal, the new Knights of Christ were allowed to keep the properties and preceptories of the former Templar order, and even the Templar banner, a red cross on a white background. The order has survived in that form to the present. The New World Order 27 in England. The Templars' survival would not be as simple. The English version of suppression united the Templars with their rival order, the Knights Hospitaller of St. John. This order pleased the demands of the Church, but according to some sources it was a charade. Templar property was administered separately for years. East of France, the Alpine regions, that would later become Switzerland, provided refuge to the Templar Knights. When their trading routes were not by sea, the Templars used the same Alpine passes to reach Italy and Germany that other merchants had used for more than 1,000 years. The order had fortified preceptories in various cantons, and the power of the order soon grew. 3 months after the fall of Acre, 3 of the cantons formed a military alliance. They were quickly joined by others, and the unified state of Switzerland would take on many of the characteristics of the order. They were respected for having a fierce army that defended itself against the expansionist German states to the north, and the avaricious France to the west. The Knights' reputation grew rapidly, and soon the Swiss Guard, as it became known, was contracted to defend the Vatican, just as the Templars had defended the Catholic religion. The Swiss, of course, soon earned another reputation, that of banker to the world. In The Warriors and the Bankers, authors Alan Butler and Stephen Dafoe point out that, although the treasury in Paris might have been the Templars' greatest central bank, the order would certainly not have kept all its valuables in one location. Switzerland grew in importance because of its political neutrality and its position as the central bank of the world.